London, right now. You're walking down a street in Kensington, past a building worth £80 million. You don't notice it. Why would you? There's no palace gate, no changing of the guard, no tourists with cameras, just a brick facade, some elegant windows, a door you'd walk straight past. Inside, a member of the British royal family lives rent-free. You pay taxes that help maintain it. Before we dive into the story, think about what you actually know about royal wealth. Buckingham Palace, sure. Windsor Castle, obviously. But what about the dozens of other properties scattered across Britain's most expensive real estate? What about the billions in assets most people never hear about? If you're ready to see behind the carefully maintained curtain of royal finance, click the like button and subscribe to the channel, because what we're about to reveal will change how you see the monarchy forever. Now let's continue with the story. The British royal family doesn't just own landmarks. They control an empire of properties worth over £2 billion that exist in a curious state of public invisibility. Some belong to the state but house royals exclusively. Others are privately owned but maintained through arrangements with public funds. A few generate commercial income while providing family homes. The system is complex by design, built over centuries, refined through legal structures most British citizens don't understand, and many don't know exist. Start with what people do know. Buckingham Palace. 775 rooms. Official residence of the monarch. Valued at roughly £5 billion, though it's never been sold and never will be. It belongs to the Crown Estate, which means it's neither government property nor personal royal wealth. It exists in a category created specifically for royal assets. Windsor Castle. Occupied fortress for nearly 1,000 years. Over 900 rooms spread across 13 acres. Another Crown Estate property. Official weekend residence. Worth perhaps £3 billion if such a building could ever be valued. These are the famous ones. The ones on postcards and documentaries. The ones foreign tourists queue for hours to glimpse. But they're not the whole picture, not even close. Across Britain, in city centers and country estates, behind nondescript doors and down private drives, sit properties owned by or occupied by the Windsor family. Properties worth tens of millions each. Properties most Britons couldn't name. Properties that raise uncomfortable questions about wealth, inheritance, and what exactly the public gets in return for funding a royal system. The total value exceeds £2 billion. Some estimates push higher. This isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. These are documented properties, recorded in official registers, discussed in Parliament when questions get asked. The information exists. It's just scattered, technical, wrapped in legal terminology that discourages casual investigation, which is exactly how the system survives. Not through secrecy, but through complexity. Not by hiding information, but by making it boring enough that most people never look. The royal property empire operates in plain sight, invisible through sheer mundanity. Anonymous buildings on expensive streets, country houses tucked behind gates marked private, apartments in palace complexes that tourists walk through without realizing people actually live there. Understanding this empire means understanding how modern monarchy actually functions. Not through crowns and ceremonies, but through property law and financial structures. Not through divine right, but through legal exceptions that preserve aristocratic wealth across generations. The story starts with recognizing what's hidden in the open. Walk through London. Drive through the countryside. The buildings are there. You just have to know where to look and what questions to ask when you find them. 3 entities. 3 separate pools of wealth. 3 different sets of rules. To understand royal property, you first need to understand that the Windsor family doesn't own things the way normal people own things. Their wealth flows through structures created over centuries, each designed to serve a specific purpose, each operating under its own legal framework. The Crown Estate, established in its modern form in 1760, belongs to the reigning monarch in right of the Crown, which is legal language meaning it's neither government property nor personal possession. The monarch can't sell it, can't give it away, can't leave it to their children in a will. It passes automatically to the next sovereign. Portfolio value, roughly £16 billion. Properties include Regent Street in London, Windsor Great Park, virtually the entire seabed around England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Commercial real estate, agricultural land, retail developments, offshore wind farms. Here's where it gets interesting. All profits from the Crown Estate go directly to the Treasury. Every penny. The government then gives the monarch a sovereign grant, currently calculated as 15% of Crown Estate profits from 2 years prior, though it jumps to 25% for years, covering Buckingham Palace renovations. In 2023, that meant the royal family received £86 million from taxpayers, funded by an estate worth billions that they technically own but can't touch. The Duchy of Lancaster, completely different animal. This one actually belongs to the monarch personally, established in 1399. Survives as a private estate specifically exempted from the Crown Estate merger. Portfolio worth roughly £650 million. Farmland across England. Commercial property in London, a chunk of the Savoy estate, historic castles, even a few rental properties in ordinary neighborhoods. The duchy generates roughly £24 million annually. That money goes straight to the monarch as private income, though by convention, it's used for official expenses not covered by the sovereign grant. The late Queen Elizabeth used duchy income for family members performing royal duties. Charles continues the practice. Key distinction: this is personal wealth. The monarch pays income tax on it voluntarily, but only since 1993 after public pressure. There's no legal requirement to do so. Then there's the Duchy of Cornwall, created in 1337 specifically to provide income for the heir to the throne, currently held by Prince William. Portfolio worth roughly £1 billion. 23 counties across England, primarily in the southwest. Farms, forests, residential rentals, commercial properties, even the Oval Cricket Ground in London. Annual income, roughly £24 million, goes directly to the Prince of Wales as private revenue, used to fund his official duties, his family, his household. Like the Duchy of Lancaster, he pays income tax voluntarily. Unlike other inherited wealth, it passes automatically to the next heir when someone becomes king. William got it the moment Charles became monarch. 3 streams of wealth, 3 legal structures, 3 different relationships between public and private, between state funding and personal fortune. The complexity isn't accidental. These arrangements evolved over centuries precisely because they're difficult to reform. Each serves as a firewall protecting royal wealth from taxation, from political interference, from the kinds of redistributive policies that might otherwise reduce aristocratic fortunes to middle-class comfort. Consider what happens when a monarch dies. In normal British inheritance, everything over £325,000 gets taxed at 40%. When Queen Elizabeth died in 2022, her estate passed to Charles completely tax-free. Special exemption granted in 1993 officially justified to keep royal assets intact for the institution. Balmoral Castle, Sandringham Estate, investment portfolios, art collections, jewelry. Estimates of her private wealth ranged from £500 million to over £1 billion. None of it taxed. The Treasury lost roughly £200 million in potential revenue. The exemption exists because Parliament decided institutional continuity mattered more than equal treatment under tax law. Charles received the same exemption his mother enjoyed. William will receive it when his time comes. This is the machinery of inherited privilege, not dramatic or violent. Just legal structures that accumulate advantage across generations. Exemptions that preserve wealth while ordinary estates get reduced. Complexity that discourages scrutiny. The properties scattered across Britain exist within these frameworks. Some belong to the Crown Estate and House Royals who own nothing. Some belong to the duchies and generate private income. Some are personally owned, purchased with inherited wealth that escaped taxation. Understanding which is which reveals how the system actually works. Clarence House sits on the Mall, attached to St. James's Palace, less than 500 yards from Buckingham Palace. 5 floors. Roughly 30 rooms, depending on how you count them. Built in 1827 for Prince William Henry, Duke of Clarence, who would later become King William IV. He never actually lived there as king. The pattern was set from the beginning. This building exists for heirs, not monarchs. Current estimated value, £100 million, possibly more given its location in one of London's most expensive postcodes. Central London, walking distance to Parliament, views over St. James's Park, the kind of address that would make property developers weep if they could ever get their hands on it. They can't. It belongs to the Crown Estate. Charles lived there for decades. From 2003 until 2022, Clarence House served as his official London residence while he waited to become king. Before that, it was the Queen Mother's home from 1953 until her death in 2002 at age 101. Before her, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip lived there briefly after their marriage in 1947. The building tells the story of royal succession through its occupants. Each heir needs somewhere to operate from. Somewhere grand enough to host foreign dignitaries and conduct official business. Somewhere separate from the reigning monarch's household. Somewhere that signals status without competing with the actual throne. When Charles became king, he moved to Buckingham Palace as required. Clarence House passed to William and Catherine as the new Prince and Princess of Wales, except they haven't moved in. They're staying at Adelaide Cottage in Windsor and keeping their Kensington Palace apartment as a London base. Clarence House sits largely unused while staff maintain it. The building underwent major renovation between 2002 and 2003. Cost, roughly £4 million from the Crown Estate. New electrical systems, updated plumbing, redecorated interiors. Charles wanted it ready for his headquarters as Prince of Wales. He got it. Inside, the morning room features John Nash's original ceiling design. The garden room overlooks lawns that back onto Buckingham Palace Gardens. The Lancaster room displays art from the royal collection. 5 floors of formal reception rooms, private apartments, staff offices, all maintained to palace standards. 27 staff members worked there during Charles's tenure. Private secretaries, correspondence officers, press handlers, household managers. The annual running cost exceeded £2 million, funded partially through the sovereign grant, partially through Duchy of Cornwall income. The accounting deliberately blurs which pot pays for what. Here's what Clarence House represents beyond bricks and rooms: institutional infrastructure for succession. The British system requires an heir apparent who functions almost as a shadow monarch, someone conducting royal duties, taking on patronages, representing the crown abroad. That person needs an operational base. Not a private home, but a working palace with reception rooms and staff quarters and all the machinery of official royal life. The building embodies the peculiar limbo of being heir to the British throne. You're not king, so you can't occupy Buckingham Palace, but you're next in line, so you need something nearly equivalent. You're preparing for a job you can't officially train for, inheriting a role while the current holder is still very much alive. The architecture reflects that tension, grand enough for importance, separate enough to maintain hierarchy. When Charles finally became king at age 73, after waiting longer than any heir in British history, Clarence House was part of what he left behind. The office moves to Buckingham Palace. The residence shifts to Windsor Castle or Sandringham or Balmoral, depending on season. A new heir gets the transitional space. William apparently doesn't want it. His children are in school in Windsor. He's said to prefer a more normal family life outside central London. So Clarence House waits, maintained at public expense, ready for whenever the Prince of Wales decides he needs it. £100 million worth of London real estate, occupied or not, preserved for one family's use. The building doesn't generate income, doesn't serve the public except for occasional charity receptions, exists purely to house whoever happens to be heir to the throne whenever they choose to use it. That's the system. That's how it works. Anmer Hall, 10 bedrooms, Georgian country house on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, given to William and Catherine as a wedding gift in 2011. Renovated extensively before they moved in. Cost, £1.5 million, funded by the Queen's private funds. New roof, new kitchen, complete interior redesign. A conservatory added. The property sits on the private Sandringham estate, meaning the Cambridges pay no rent, no property tax, nothing. Estimated value, somewhere north of £3 million for the house alone. Add the land, the privacy, the access to Sandringham's facilities, and you're looking at a gift worth substantially more. The family uses it as their primary residence, away from London's scrutiny, with their children attending local schools nearby. Gatcombe Park, 730 acres in Gloucestershire. Purchased for Princess Anne in 1976 by the Queen for roughly £500,000. Today's value, easily £20 million or more. The estate includes the main house, several cottages, working farmland. Anne still lives there, now in her 70s, operating the property as a working farm while hosting equestrian events. Her children live in separate houses on the same estate. 3 generations of one family on property purchased by the monarch decades ago. Its value multiplied many times over. Bagshot Park, 51 rooms. Victorian mansion in Surrey, about 25 miles from London. Home to Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Leased from the Crown Estate on a token rent, technically £150 per year, though he reportedly covers maintenance costs. The building needed massive renovation when they moved in during 1999. 57 acres of grounds, current estimated value, £30 million minimum. The arrangement, Edward gets a palace-sized residence for essentially nothing, covers the upkeep himself from duchy money and other royal funds, lives there as long as he performs royal duties. When he stops working or dies, it reverts to the Crown Estate for the next royal who needs housing. Royal Lodge, 30 rooms, Windsor Great Park, about 3 miles from Windsor Castle. Prince Andrew's residence since 2004, another Crown Estate property, another sweetheart lease. Reports suggest he pays around £260 per week, roughly £13,000 annually for a mansion worth £30 million. The lease runs 75 years from 2003. He's responsible for maintenance, which became contentious after he stepped back from royal duties in 2019 but wanted to keep the house. The property includes 98 acres of grounds, elaborate gardens, staff cottages. Andrew had major renovations done, costing roughly £7.5 million, funded partially through his own money, partially through unclear royal arrangements. After his disgrace, following the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, there's been pressure for him to move somewhere smaller and cheaper. He's resisted. The building sits there, occupied by someone who no longer represents the monarchy officially, yet still protected by the family structure. These country properties share common features. All were granted or purchased using royal wealth. All have increased dramatically in value over decades. All provide family members with estates worth millions, while they pay little or nothing in market rent. All exist in legal arrangements that blur lines between official residence, family privilege, and institutional support. The pattern reveals how royal wealth compounds across generations. A property purchased in the 1970s for £500,000 is now worth $20 million. A lease granted for token rent provides housing worth millions annually. Renovations funded from royal purses increase values that stay within the family. None of it generates income for the state. All of it reduces what family members would otherwise need to earn or pay themselves. Frogmore Cottage, where Harry and Meghan briefly lived, cost $2.5 million in renovations that sparked public outrage. They eventually repaid it. But that controversy obscured a larger reality. Every working royal lives somewhere grand at reduced or zero cost. Renovation bills covered through arrangements the public barely tracks. The country homes scattered across England's most desirable counties form a network of aristocratic comfort, funded through centuries of accumulated advantage, preserved through the royal system's unique legal protections. Kensington Palace looks like one building. It's actually more than a dozen separate residences carved into apartments of varying sizes, most of them occupied, many by people whose connection to current royal duties is tenuous at best. The public tours a handful of staterooms while literally next door, behind unmarked doors, royals and their relatives live rent-free in some of London's most valuable real estate. The palace complex sprawls across Kensington Gardens. Built in 1605, purchased by William III in 1689, expanded over centuries. Current estimated value for the entire complex, easily £500 million given its location in Kensington, one of London's most expensive boroughs. Individual apartments within it are worth tens of millions each. Apartment 1A, William and Catherine's primary London residence until they moved to Windsor. 4 stories, 20 rooms. Renovated between 2011 and 13 at a cost of £4.5 million, funded by the sovereign grant. The work included removing asbestos, updating electrical systems, redecorating throughout. They now use it mainly for official engagements rather than daily living, but it remains theirs, maintained and ready. Princess Margaret lived in apartment 1A before them, from 1960 until her death in 2002. After she died, the apartment sat empty for years, while decisions were made about its future. Empty, but maintained. Staff keeping it heated, cleaned, preserved. Taxpayer money spent on rooms no one occupied. Apartment 8 and 9, Prince and Princess, Michael of Kent. He's a first cousin of Queen Elizabeth, 48th in line to the throne as of recent counts. They paid rent initially, reportedly £69 per week, absurdly below market rate. After public criticism, they began paying something closer to commercial rates, around £10,000 monthly, still below market for a 5-reception room apartment in Kensington Palace, but at least acknowledging the optics. The Kents perform some royal duties, though increasingly fewer as they age. The question remains, why do distant relatives get palace apartments at any rent when millions of Britons struggle to afford housing? Apartment 10, Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. Another first cousin of the late Queen, 63rd in line to the throne. They pay no rent, justified because they're working royals performing official duties. The Gloucester apartments are extensive, occupying significant palace space maintained through Crown estate budgets. Ivy Cottage. Princess Eugenie lived there with her husband Jack Brooksbank. She's 11th in line to the throne, performs no official royal duties, works in the private art world. The cottage sits within Kensington Palace grounds, 3 bedrooms, valued conservatively at several £million given location alone. They've since moved, but for years, a non-working royal occupied prime palace property. Nottingham Cottage, Harry and Meghan's first home together. 2 bedrooms, relatively modest by palace standards, but still a palace cottage in central London. They described it as cozy, smaller than most people imagine. After they left for Frogmore Cottage, then California, it became available for others. The cycle continues. Royals move between properties the Crown Estate maintains, musical chairs with multi-million-pound residences. The palace also houses offices, staff quarters, storage for the royal collection, maintenance crews. Dozens of people work there daily. Some live on-site in staff apartments, paid modest salaries, occupying servants' quarters, while royals live in grand apartments meters away. The physical structure mirrors the social hierarchy it was built to reinforce. Kensington Palace opened sections to tourists in 1993. Visitors pay £24 for adults as of recent pricing, walking through staterooms and exhibits about Victoria's childhood, Diana's fashion, royal history. They're seeing maybe 10% of the complex. The rest remains private, closed doors behind which actual people live actual lives, funded by systems those tourists will never fully understand. The subdivision of Kensington Palace demonstrates how the royal system perpetuates itself through property. Give family members homes in prestigious locations. Let them live there for decades. Their children grow up expecting similar privilege. The next generation requires more housing. More apartments get allocated. The web expands, each thread anchored by buildings that appreciate in value while their occupants pay nothing close to market rates. When people think of royal property, they picture Buckingham Palace standing empty except for official events. They don't picture a dozen families living in subdivided palaces across London, each apartment worth millions, most occupied by people the average Briton couldn't identify in a police lineup. That's the genius of the system. It hides in plain sight behind a famous name. Balmoral Castle, 50,000 acres of Scottish Highlands, purchased in 1852 by Prince Albert for £31,500 as a gift for Queen Victoria. In today's money, roughly £3 million. Current estimated value, somewhere between £140 million and £200 million depending on assessment methods. Possibly more given its historical significance, and the impossibility of replacing such an estate. This one is different. Balmoral doesn't belong to the Crown Estate. It's not held in trust. It's not leased from the state. The royal family owns it outright, privately, the same way anyone might own property. Victoria bought it with personal funds, and it's passed down through inheritance ever since. When Elizabeth died, Charles inherited it directly as part of her private estate. No inheritance tax paid due to the sovereign-to-sovereign exemption. The castle itself was rebuilt shortly after purchase. Victoria and Albert found the original house too small, so they constructed a new baronial-style castle completed in 1856. 100 rooms eventually, after various expansions. Scottish granite, towers and turrets. The architectural embodiment of Victorian romantic notions about Highland life. The royal family still uses the original structure as additional accommodation. The estate operates as a working property. Grouse moors for shooting, deer stalking, salmon fishing in the River Dee, forestry operations, Highland cattle, staff cottages scattered across the property. A small village, Crathie, sits nearby where the family attends church services during their stays. The estate employs roughly 50 people year-round, more during the family's summer residence period, from August through October. Elizabeth spent every summer there for 70 years. It's where she died in September 2022 at age 96. Charles continues the tradition, retreating to Balmoral each autumn. The pattern holds across generations. This is where the family goes to be genuinely private, away from London's scrutiny, on land they actually own. The distinction matters. At Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, they're occupying state property, living in buildings that belong to the institution rather than the individual. At Balmoral, they're on their own land. They can renovate without government approval, can exclude visitors entirely, can shoot, fish, walk the hills without coordinating with Crown Estate managers. It's the closest thing to normal property ownership they experience. The privacy comes at the cost of isolation. Balmoral sits 600 miles from London. The nearest city, Aberdeen, is 50 miles away. The estate is deliberately remote, chosen by Victoria precisely for its distance from court politics and public attention. That remoteness makes it impractical for regular use. too far for weekend trips, useless for official duties requiring London proximity. It functions purely as retreat, holiday home, refuge. The financial arrangement is equally distinct. Balmoral generates some income through tourism during months when the family isn't in residence. The ballroom hosts exhibitions, grounds and gardens open to paying visitors. But it's not a commercial operation. Revenue barely covers maintenance costs on a 50,000-acre Highland estate, with a castle requiring constant upkeep in Scotland's harsh climate. The family keeps it anyway, not because it makes financial sense, because it represents something they value more than efficiency: absolute ownership. No leases, no Crown Estate oversight, no questions from Parliament about how it's used. Just private property passed down through generations, its value compounding, its upkeep offset by wealth from other sources. When Charles inherited Balmoral from his mother, that transfer would have triggered 40% inheritance tax if he were anyone else. The estate's value alone could have meant 60 to 80 million pounds owed to the Treasury. Instead, zero. The exemption that saves royal wealth across generations meant Scotland's most famous private estate changed hands without contributing anything to public finances. The exemption's justification rests on maintaining institutional continuity. If royal estates got taxed normally, the argument goes, eventually they'd need to be sold to cover tax bills. The monarchy would lose its material foundations. Better to exempt sovereign-to-sovereign transfers than risk breaking up royal property. That logic makes Balmoral particularly interesting. It's private property, not institutional, yet it benefits from institutional protections. The family owns it personally, while avoiding the taxes personal ownership normally entails. They get both privilege and protection, private benefit, and public exemption. Balmoral reveals what the family chooses when they can choose freely. Not city palaces, not grand public gestures, just land, privacy, and absolute control. Sandringham House. 20,000 acres in Norfolk, purchased in 1862 by Queen Victoria for the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VII, when he was 21. Cost, £220,000, roughly $25 million in today's money. Current value estimates range from £65 million to over £100 million for the house and estate combined. Like Balmoral, Sandringham is privately owned. It passed from Edward to George V to George VI to Elizabeth II to Charles III. Each transfer tax-free under the sovereign exemption. Private property sheltered by public privilege. The house itself contains around 200 rooms, though exact counts vary depending on how you categorize storage and service areas. Red brick Jacobean Revival style. Built in 1870 after the original house was demolished as inadequate. The family considers it dated now, even shabby by palace standards. Elizabeth reportedly called it her most comfortable home. Charles has indicated he finds it too large and expensive to maintain, though he continues spending Christmas there as tradition demands. But Sandringham isn't just a house. It's a working agricultural estate generating actual income. 3,500 acres of farmland producing cereals and vegetables, commercial apple orchards, soft fruit, operations. The estate supplies fruit to major British retailers. There's a stud farm breeding horses, a fruit farm open to the public during harvest season, woodland managed for timber. Then there's the tourist operation. Sandringham opens to visitors from April through October when the family isn't in residence. The house tours, garden visits, and museum attract roughly 500,000 visitors annually. Admission fees, gift shop sales. Cafe revenue. The estate functions as a business, employees on payroll, accounts to balance, profit and loss statements. Annual income from all Sandringham operations runs to several million pounds. Exact figures aren't published because it's private property, and the family isn't required to disclose detailed finances. But the estate doesn't just cost money, it generates it. Unlike Buckingham Palace, which drains public funds while serving ceremonial purposes, Sandringham operates commercially while providing a family home. The estate employs around 200 people full-time: farm workers, groundskeepers, household staff, retail employees, maintenance crews. They're paid from estate income, not taxpayer funds. When critics attack royal spending, Sandringham presents a defense: private property, privately funded, generating economic activity in rural Norfolk. But look closer. The estate was purchased with royal wealth accumulated through centuries of state funding. The land has appreciated from £220,000 to over £100 million without the family paying capital gains tax. Income generated gets taxed only because Charles volunteered to pay income tax in 1993, not because law requires it. And the estate still receives indirect public support through security costs whenever royals visit, roads maintained for access, local infrastructure upgrades tied to royal presence. The property includes numerous cottages housing estate workers and retired staff. The old stables were converted into a museum displaying royal vehicles and memorabilia. There's a church, St. Mary Magdalene, where the family attends Christmas services, creating the annual spectacle of royals walking to church while crowds photograph them. That Christmas tradition alone generates massive publicity value for the Norfolk tourism industry. Elizabeth died at Balmoral, but Sandringham held deeper personal significance. She was born there in April 1926, spent countless childhood holidays there, chose it for private family Christmases throughout her reign. Philip died there in April 2021. The estate witnessed key family moments across 4 generations. Charles plans to open Sandringham more widely to the public, potentially year-round access to gardens and grounds. The shift reflects changing calculations about royal property: keep it entirely private and face criticism about hoarded wealth, open it commercially, and demonstrate economic contribution while generating revenue to offset maintenance costs. Sandringham shows monarchy adapting to survive, not by relinquishing property or paying market-rate taxes, but by adding commercial operations that create the appearance of productivity. The family still owns the land, still lives there rent-free, still benefits from centuries of accumulated advantage. They've just learned to frame it as economic contribution rather than aristocratic privilege. The 20,000 acres remain in royal hands. The house still serves as private residence. The profits still flow to the family. The only thing that's changed is the marketing. St. James's Palace, built by Henry VIII between 1531 and 36 on the site of a former leper hospital, still the official residence of the sovereign, even though no monarch has actually lived there since 1837. Foreign ambassadors are still accredited to the court of St. James's. The palace hosts working offices, grace and favor apartments, reception rooms for official functions. Walk past it on Pall Mall. Red brick Tudor architecture, guards posted outside. Most tourists photograph it quickly and move on toward Buckingham Palace. They don't realize several senior royals maintain offices inside. Princess Anne works from there. Princess Beatrice has office space. The palace serves as headquarters for various royal operations, while also providing residential apartments for select staff and royal household members. Estimated value for the complex: over £300 million given its central London location and historical significance. It generates no income, costs money to maintain, exists purely to house royal administrative operations that could theoretically happen anywhere. Just down the mall sits Marlborough House, built in 1711 for the Duchess of Marlborough, became royal property in 1817. Queen Mary lived there for years. Now it hosts the Commonwealth Secretariat, leased to them by the Crown Estate at presumably favorable terms. The building itself is worth at least £50 million. Prime London real estate dedicated to an organization that serves the Commonwealth, which exists largely because of British imperial history, perpetuating networks that benefit the monarchy's international relevance. Lancaster House across the road, another palace in all but name, built in 1825. The Crown Estate owns it, used for government receptions and diplomatic events, valued around £30 million. Foreign dignitaries get hosted there, creating associations between British state power and royal grandeur, even though technically it's government property. The geography clusters royal and state buildings together, making them inseparable in public imagination. Then there are the lesser-known properties, buildings along the Mall with royal crests above doorways, apartment blocks in Kensington and Westminster housing minor royals, retired courtiers, and staff. These grace and favor residences exist throughout London, granted to people who served the monarchy, often for life, at rents far below market rate or no rent at all. The system operates quietly. Someone works as a private secretary for 20 years. They retire. The palace offers them a grace and favor apartment in a Crown Estate building. They live there until death, paying minimal or nothing, in properties worth millions. It's presented as generous recognition of loyal service. It's also a way to maintain networks of dependence and gratitude that reinforce the system. Map these properties and you see a geographic empire. Buckingham Palace at the center, St. James's Palace and Clarence House to the east, Kensington Palace to the west, Windsor Castle 23 miles out. Residential apartments scattered between, office buildings, storage facilities, staff accommodations, all clustered in Britain's most expensive regions, their combined value easily exceeding £1 billion just for the London properties alone. None of this generates public revenue except through tourism at select sites. Most Britons will never enter these buildings. They walk past them daily, seeing facades, guards, tourists taking photographs. The actual function and cost remain invisible. Consider the opportunity cost. St. James's Palace. On that land could be luxury apartments housing hundreds. Lancaster House could be a hotel generating millions in annual revenue. The Grace and Favor apartments could house NHS workers or teachers at affordable rates instead of retired courtiers. Every royal property represents alternative uses foreclosed by preservation of aristocratic privilege. The counterargument claims tourism value. People visit Britain to see palaces. The buildings attract foreign spending that exceeds maintenance costs. France, the typical rebuttal goes, still profits from Versailles without a monarchy. The palaces themselves have value separate from their occupants. But that logic doesn't apply to the working offices and private apartments scattered across London. Nobody tours St. James's Palace apartments. No tourist revenue comes from Grace and Favor flats in Kensington. Those properties serve purely to maintain the machinery of monarchy, providing free or subsidized housing to people whose primary qualification is connection to the royal system. Walk through Westminster and Kensington, aware of what's behind those facades. Not museums, not monuments. Actual homes and offices occupied by actual people who pay nothing close to what those addresses would command on the open market. The invisibility is the point. Most people never question it because most people never think about it. September 8, 2022. Queen Elizabeth dies at Balmoral, age 96. Within moments, Charles becomes king, automatically. No ceremony required. The crown passes instantly under British constitutional law. So does the wealth, Elizabeth's private. Estate transferred to Charles that same day. Balmoral Castle, Sandringham Estate. Investment portfolios estimated between £200 million and £500 million. Art collections. Jewelry, rare stamps, personal possessions accumulated over 9 decades. The exact total remains unknown because the royal family isn't required to publish detailed inventories of private wealth. Estimates range wildly, but even conservative figures put it above £500 million. Normal British inheritance law is straightforward. Everything above £325,000 gets taxed at 40%. If you inherit £1 million, you pay 40% on £675,000. That's £270,000 to the Treasury. Charles inherited at minimum 500 million. At standard rates, that would mean roughly 200 million pounds in inheritance tax, possibly more if the estate was larger than estimates suggest. He paid nothing. The exemption was granted in 1993 after negotiations between Prime Minister John Major's government and palace officials. The official justification? Preserve royal assets intact to maintain the institution. If each generation paid 40% inheritance tax, within a few successions, the monarchy would be forced to sell properties to cover tax bills. Balmoral might go to private developers. Sandringham could be subdivided. The institutional continuity would fracture. Parliament accepted this logic. The exemption passed. Since then, sovereign-to-sovereign transfers happen tax-free. The public loses hundreds of millions in potential revenue to preserve royal wealth accumulation across generations. The exemption applies only to assets passing from monarch to monarch. If Elizabeth had left money to Anne or Edward, that would have been taxed normally. But everything going to Charles as the new sovereign escaped taxation. The law creates a specific carve-out for one family, justified by their unique constitutional role. Consider what that means practically. Charles received hundreds of millions tax-free. He simultaneously inherited the Duchy of Lancaster, worth over 650 million pounds. Generating roughly 24 million annually in income he'll pay income tax on voluntarily, but isn't legally required to. He already had the Duchy of Cornwall before becoming king, worth about 1 billion pounds, which he held for decades, and now passed to William. The wealth compounds. Each generation inherits more than the last because property values increase, investments grow, and nothing gets taxed away. Over centuries, this creates accumulation impossible for ordinary families. Even wealthy aristocrats lose 40% each generation. The Windsors lose nothing. The counterargument claims the monarch doesn't truly own crown estate properties, so comparing royal wealth to private wealth misleads. Fair enough. But the duchies are different. They're private estates generating private income. Balmoral and Sandringham are indisputably personal property. The investment portfolios and art collections belong to the individual, not the institution. Those assets alone easily exceed 500 million pounds. When Philip died in 2021, he left his estate to Elizabeth. That transfer also happened tax-free under spousal exemption rules that apply to everyone. But Philip had significant personal wealth, estimates around 30 million pounds. That merged into Elizabeth's estate, which then passed to Charles without taxation. 2 generations of accumulation, 0 inheritance tax paid. Compare this to ordinary British families. Someone dies leaving a family home worth £500,000 and some savings. The inheritors pay 40% on everything above $325,000. They might need to sell the house to cover the tax bill. Properties held for generations get liquidated because tax law doesn't exempt ordinary people from contributing to public finances when they inherit. The Windsor exemption costs the Treasury hundreds of millions every few decades when a monarch dies. That's money that could fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Instead, it preserves private wealth for one family, justified by arguments about institutional stability that could equally apply to other national institutions that somehow manage without tax exemptions. Charles became king and inherited a fortune. William will do the same when his time comes. George after him. Each transfer tax-free. Each generation wealthier than the last. The system perpetuates aristocratic accumulation indefinitely, protected by laws ordinary families never benefit from, funded implicitly by everyone who does pay inheritance tax. That's the arrangement. That's how hereditary privilege survives in a supposedly modern democracy. Add it up. The Crown Estate Properties housing royals, over £1 billion in London alone. The duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall combined, roughly £1.6 billion. Balmoral and Sandringham, perhaps £250 million conservatively. Grace and Favour apartments, country estates granted to family members, properties scattered across Britain's most valuable postcodes, easily another few hundred million. Personal investments, art collections, jewelry, passed down through generations. Estimates vary wildly, but certainly hundreds of millions more. Total the visible assets and you're comfortably above £2 billion. Factor in properties difficult to value because they'd never sell, and the figure climbs higher. But the properties themselves aren't the point. They're the physical manifestation of something deeper, a system that preserves inherited power across centuries through legal structures most citizens never examine. The buildings are just evidence. The genius lies in how the system operates, not through force or obvious oppression, through complexity and bureaucracy and institutional arrangements that seem technical rather than political. The Crown Estate isn't owned by the monarch, technically, so calling it royal wealth feels inaccurate. Except the monarch lives in Crown Estate properties rent-free for life. The duchies are private property, technically, except they can't be sold and pass automatically to specific heirs. Inheritance happens tax-free, technically for institutional continuity, except the primary benefit flows to individuals who accumulate personal wealth. Every mechanism has a justification. Every privilege has a precedent. Every exception to normal rules exists for reasons that sound legitimate in isolation. Only when you map the entire system do you see how it functions as a whole. To maintain aristocratic advantage indefinitely, insulated from the market forces and tax obligations that limit wealth accumulation for everyone else. Most people never look at it this way. They see Buckingham Palace and think tourism. They see the sovereign grant and assume it covers everything. They don't track the duchy income, the inheritance exemptions, the Grace and Favour apartments, the country estates, the compounding property values, the network of financial arrangements that blur lines between public and private, until neither category means anything. The invisibility is structural. Information exists, but scattered across different entities. The Crown Estate publishes accounts, but those don't include duchy properties. The duchies publish financial summaries, but not detailed breakdowns. Private properties like Balmoral require no public reporting. Grace and Favour arrangements happen through internal palace decisions. Nobody maintains a comprehensive public database of every property, every occupant, every financial flow. Researching royal wealth means piecing together fragments from parliamentary reports, historical records, occasional news investigations, property registries. Possible, but time-consuming enough that most people never attempt it. The system survives partly through the sheer tedium of documenting it. When criticism emerges, defenders pivot between arguments depending on which is convenient. The Crown Estate generates billions for the Treasury, they say, ignoring that the monarch couldn't sell it anyway. The sovereign grant covers official duties, they note, skipping past the duchy income that tops it up. The family brings in tourism revenue, they claim, without acknowledging France's palace tourism survives without resident royals. The properties matter because they make the abstraction concrete. Walk past Clarence House, £100 million sitting mostly unused. Drive through Norfolk, 20,000 acres owned privately tax-free. Count the apartments in Kensington Palace housing minor royals nobody recognizes. The wealth becomes real. The privilege becomes visible. Whether that's acceptable comes down to values. Some argue tradition justifies exception, that monarchy requires material grandeur to function symbolically, that continuity matters more than equality. Others see systematic inequality, aristocratic privilege preserved through special legal treatment, public resources diverted to private benefit. The properties will remain regardless. Charles isn't selling Balmoral. William will inherit the Duchy of Cornwall. The Grace and Favour apartments will house loyal courtiers, The system perpetuates because it's designed to perpetuate, built over centuries specifically to resist change. Understanding it won't destroy it, but understanding is the first step toward asking whether a democracy should maintain legal structures that exempt one family from rules everyone else follows. £2 billion in properties, zero inheritance tax, minimal market rate rent paid, centuries of accumulated advantage, compounding still. If this story changed how you see the monarchy, click that like button and subscribe, because there are dozens more untold stories about power, wealth, and the systems that preserve both. The buildings are still there. The question is whether they always will be.